sweet. Even if you don't believe, let the words wrap around me like the warmth I never see. I know truth's a heavy thing, but tonight I need the dream. I want forever just to lie, soft enough to get me by. I'll take the echo of your breath, if that's all I can get. Just tell me I'm the only one until the night is done. Lie to me softly, say you need me, even if tomorrow you don't feel me. Whisper like you mean it, make me believe that you want me, that you see me. Lie to me softly, I just wanna feel complete.
The harsh, fluorescent lights of the backstage area flickered as Amara Bennett stood in the corner, clutching a battered guitar with broken strings. At only 9 years old, her small frame was worn thin by the cold streets, by the constant hunger, by the ever-present judgment that followed her wherever she went. Yet in that moment, standing backstage at Fame Unfolded, Amara radiated something powerful, something that could never be taken from her, even by the producers who saw her as nothing more than a prop for their amusement. The man in the sharp suit, his eyes cold with indifference, looked down at her and let out a cruel laugh. Do you think you're here to win something? You're here to entertain them, make them laugh. Amara didn't flinch. Her eyes, dark and steady, locked with his, and she responded with a quiet strength that made him pause. If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food? The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Her voice, though small, carried the weight of a life lived in shadows. He didn't understand it, couldn't possibly. But what he didn't see was a fire that burned behind her words, the same fire that had kept her alive on the streets for the past 3 years. The music, her grandmother's teachings, everything she had been through, had led her to this moment. She wasn't here for pity. She wasn't here for charity. She was here to change everything, to make them see her, truly see her, for who she was, for who she had always been. Amara stepped forward, adjusting the guitar strap on her shoulder. As she walked past the producer, she whispered under her breath, "This is where the world finds out how wrong they've been. Do you trust the world to see you for who you really are? How often have you felt misunderstood, underestimated, or ignored? Yet sometimes it's those moments, the ones when you're told you're nothing, that ignite a fire deep within you." Amara's journey isn't just about music. It's about breaking free from the chains of expectation and discovering who you truly are beneath the surface. If you ever felt that hunger for recognition, for validation, for love, join us on this journey. And make sure to subscribe, because Amara's story is just the beginning. Amara could hear the sound of footsteps approaching, the hurried click of designers' shoes against the polished floors of the studio. The other children were gathering in the waiting area, their voices rising in excited chatter as they prepared for their moments in the spotlight. Stylists brushed their hair, assistants handed them cold bottles of water, and makeup artists carefully painted their faces with the precision of artists creating masterpieces. Meanwhile, Amara sat in the farthest corner of the room, her bare feet against the cold floor, her guitar resting gently on her lap. She watched them, the children with their perfectly pressed clothes, their polished smiles, their lives filled with opportunities she could only dream of. They didn't know what it was like to sleep under a torn blanket on a city sidewalk. They didn't understand hunger. They didn't understand survival. Her eyes followed the assistant as she moved toward her, the woman's smile overly sweet, almost condescending. "Sorry, sweetie," she said, her tone dripping with false politeness. "These snacks are only for the official participants." Amara didn't move, didn't flinch. "Actually, I'm here before him, too," she said, her voice unwavering. The assistant blinked, confusion flashing in her eyes. "Oh, yes, you're the special girl." The way she said special made it clear that it was anything but a compliment. A slow, knowing smile curved on Amara's lips. She had heard it all before. The whispers, the dismissive glances, the laughter behind her back. But today it would all change. She stood, her small body trembling with the weight of the moment, but not with fear, never fear. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. When the world tries to diminish you, you grow twice as big. She stepped toward the stage, ignoring the whispers that followed her, the eyes that looked her up and down with judgment. Every step was a defiance. Every step was a promise. I will not be ignored. I will not be humiliated. I will make them see me. As she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights temporarily blinded her, but she welcomed the sensation. She had lived most of her life in shadows, in corners where no one looked, where no one cared. But this time, the spotlight was hers. She wasn't going to sing just to survive. She was going to sing to make the world remember her name. "Hello," she said, her voice calm and steady as it echoed through the microphone. "My name is Amara Dorothy Bennett. I want to dedicate this song to my grandmother, who taught me that music has no color, no social class. It simply is." The words felt like they belonged to someone else, but she said them anyway. She had been preparing for this moment her whole life, and it was no longer just about the song. It was about everything that had come before, about the nights spent in subway tunnels, honing her voice, about the mornings when she woke hungry, but never broken, about the years spent in her grandmother's arms, learning that music wasn't just a gift, it was a weapon. Her fingers brushed the strings of the guitar, and for a moment, it felt like she was playing not just for herself, but for her grandmother, for the people who had been overlooked, for the ones who had never been given a chance. The first chord rang out, pure and clear, a stark contrast to the noise that had filled her life until now. But then the sabotage came, a hiss, a buzz, a deliberate distortion of her sound. The system was broken, malfunctioning in the worst possible way. The audience's faces twisted in discomfort. Some people laughed, assuming the failure was hers. Some whispered in disbelief, eager to see the young girl falter. But Amara didn't stop. She stepped away from the mic, stood in the center of the stage, and began to sing. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the auditorium without the aid of a microphone. She didn't need it. She had never needed it. Her voice, raw and unfiltered, cut through the air like a blade, each note a defiant reclamation of what had been stolen from her. The audience fell silent, and for a moment, it wasn't just the sound of her voice filling the space. It was the sound of every person in that room realizing the truth. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated her. The producers, who had laughed at her, who had thought her nothing more than a joke, now stood frozen. They had expected to humiliate her. They had planned to turn her into a spectacle. But Amara Bennett was no one's pawn. Richard, the producer, barked into his earpiece. "Cut the feed. Turn off the cameras." But it was too late. The cameras were already rolling. The broadcast was live, and the world was watching. As Amara finished the song, there was a long, pregnant silence. It lasted just long enough to make her heart race. But then, as if the entire world exhaled at once, the audience erupted in applause. They stood, they cheered, they cried, and in that moment, Amara understood something her oppressors had never known. Talent is not something you can control. It cannot be contained. It cannot be silenced. James Mitchell, the network's executive director, stepped onto the stage. His presence was commanding, his voice carrying authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, addressing the crowd, "I need to tell you who this extraordinary girl really is. The room fell silent as James continued. Amara Dorothy Bennett is a granddaughter of Dorothy Williams, one of the greatest gospel singers in this country. Dorothy was one of the first black women to graduate from Juilliard in the 1960s, a time when that was practically impossible. She was also my mentor for over 20 years. Amara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. Her grandmother's legacy, the history she had carried with her for so long, was now out in the open. James looked at Amara with a mixture of guilt and admiration. Amara didn't come here for charity. She didn't come here to be humiliated. She came here to show what she's capable of. Amara stood at the center of the stage, the applause still echoing in her ears, a sweet sound of victory, but one that felt distant, almost surreal. She had done it. Her voice had broken through the noise, through the sabotage, and now it was impossible to ignore her. James Mitchell stepped forward, his eyes still fixed on Amara, as if he was seeing her for the first time. His heart was still racing from the revelation, from the raw power he had just witnessed. The thought of all the years spent underestimating people like Amara made him sick to his core. Dorothy Williams had always spoken of potential in people like Amara, people who didn't fit the mold, who lived in the margins. But James had never realized the truth of it until now. He turned to the crowd, his voice steady but filled with emotion. You've all just witnessed something extraordinary. Amara didn't just come here to sing. She came here to show us what real talent looks like. He paused, his eyes flicking toward Richard, who was still frozen in shock backstage. And now, I'm going to tell you the truth. Amara Dorothy Bennett is not just any contestant. She's a granddaughter of Dorothy Williams, one of the greatest gospel singers this country has ever known. The silence that followed was palpable. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't fear this time. It was a feeling of vindication. Her grandmother's legacy, her bloodline, was now part of her story, and the world couldn't pretend to ignore it. Dorothy Williams was one of the first black women to graduate from Juilliard in the 1960s, and she was the woman who shaped me into the man I am today. James's voice shook slightly as he spoke, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I had no idea she had a granddaughter, let alone one who had been living on the streets. His gaze softened as he looked back at Amara, the pain of realizing how much he had failed her, and others like her, filling his chest. Amara didn't need anyone's pity. She's here to show us exactly what she's capable of. Richard, who had been cowering behind the curtains, finally stepped forward, his face pale as a ghost. He had heard the words James spoke, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The audience's cheers were deafening, drowning out his attempts to regain control. Richard's career, built on exploiting the vulnerable, was crumbling before his eyes. But the real twist was just beginning. Amara stood tall, her small body now brimming with the confidence of someone who had always known her worth. Her eyes locked onto Richard, not with anger, but with something deeper, something that was born from years of surviving and learning to rise above the people who tried to bring her down. She turned to James, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. You don't need to do anything, James. Let them see me for who I am. Let them watch the real show. James nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. This was her moment, not just to prove herself, but to reclaim her dignity in front of millions. Amara turned toward the audience, her hand still gripping the neck of her guitar. She didn't need the microphone. She didn't need the sound system. What she had was something more powerful, something that no amount of sabotage could take from her. Her voice. Without hesitation, she began to sing once more, this time without the aid of a mic. Her voice, clear and unbroken, filled the room with the purest, most haunting version of Amazing Grace anyone had ever heard. There was no distortion, no interference, Only the raw, unfiltered sound of a girl who had learned to make herself heard despite everything the world had thrown at her. As her voice soared, she could feel the weight of every moment she had lived, the long nights on the streets, the painful memories of her grandmother's passing, the quiet rage that had fueled her every step forward. And with every note, she felt the audience slowly begin to realize this wasn't just a performance. This was her story, her truth. The crowd was mesmerized, silent in awe. Even Richard, despite himself, couldn't help but feel the pull of her voice, the undeniable force that it tried to suppress. It was a truth he couldn't hide any longer. And with that, he realized he had underestimated the wrong person. The sound technician, realizing they could no longer sabotage a performance without being caught, stopped their attempts. The room was still. The music was allowed to flow. The applause that followed was overwhelming. So loud, so genuine, that it echoed through Amara's very soul. What if the world had always been wrong about you? What if the ones who tried to silence you, to put you in a box, were the ones who needed to be taught a lesson? Amara's story is a testament to the power of standing tall when the world tries to push you down. Trust in yourself, and you'll see that true greatness doesn't ask for permission. It takes what it deserves. If the story of resilience and power resonated with you, don't forget to share, and subscribe. Your journey of self-discovery might just be beginning. Amara finished her song, her voice still echoing in the quiet room. The standing ovation was deafening, but to her, it was just a backdrop to the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when everything would shift. Her heart raced not because of the applause, but because, for the first time, she knew that she had been seen, truly seen for the depth of her talent and her humanity. The world could no longer ignore her. James Mitchell, who had been watching from the side of the stage, was the first to approach her, his face pale from the emotional weight of the moment. He had lived through many moments in the industry, but nothing had moved him quite like this. "Amara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I." She stopped him with a small but forceful gesture. "It's not about the applause, James." She stepped closer to him, her eyes not just searching his, but reading him, absorbing the gravity of his presence. There was something in his gaze that made her chest tighten, a mixture of guilt and admiration, something raw and vulnerable. He wasn't the enemy. He was just another man who had failed to see what was right in front of him. "It's about what you do with this moment." She let the words hang in the air, heavy with their truth. "It's about what happens next." James swallowed hard, his hand hovering awkwardly by his side before he finally reached out to her. "You are extraordinary." She allowed herself a brief smile, one that held so much weight, so much power. "I'm just starting." Backstage, Richard had disappeared into the shadows, trying to hide from a growing storm of public discontent. Amar's performance had gone viral within minutes, and the flood of reactions was impossible to ignore. The audience's reaction had been pure, unfiltered emotion, and now the entire country was watching. Amara stood in front of the stage, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. She had shattered expectations. She had rewritten the rules of a world that tried to limit her to a stereotype, to a role they had cast for her. And yet, there was still work to be done. James approached her again, this time with a sense of urgency in his steps. "Amara, I know." She interrupted him, her voice soft but firm. "I know what you're thinking, and I understand. But this moment isn't just mine. It's for everyone who's been made to feel small, everyone who's been overlooked, dismissed." She paused, looking at him through the veil of the spotlight. "Music is our weapon. It's our voice. It's everything we carry within us, even when the world refuses to listen." James felt a pang of regret. If only he had known sooner. If only he had looked harder. But now, it was too late for those thoughts. It was time to do something. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice low, laden with the weight of guilt. Amara looked at him, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw something softer in her eyes. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by the resolute clarity that had gotten her this far. I don't need charity, James. I need you to watch me. Watch me take what is mine, and watch everyone else realize that their assumptions have cost them. James nodded. Understanding the unspoken challenge, she laid at his feet. Then, let's do this together. As Amara stepped off the stage, the quiet tension in the air shifted. The game had changed. The producers who had once looked at her with contempt were now facing the fallout of their actions. Richard, his face flushed with panic, moved quickly through the backstage area, trying to avoid the swelling tide of public outrage. But it was already too late. Amara's performance had set the stage for something much bigger, and he was about to feel the consequences. Amara's words echoed in James's mind. This isn't just for me. It's for everyone who's been silenced. He stepped into the conference room, his mind already moving to action. It was time to turn this moment into real change. I've just witnessed something extraordinary. He addressed the room, his voice strong now, filled with newfound resolve. Amara Dorothy Bennett is not just a contestant here. She's the granddaughter of Dorothy Williams, one of the greatest gospel singers in this country. Dorothy was one of the first black women to graduate from Juilliard in the 1960s, and she mentored me. She taught me that talent doesn't ask permission. It takes what it deserves. The room fell silent as his words landed. The truth was undeniable. Amara stood at the center of the storm, calm in the chaos. She had known this moment was coming. She had known this defining moment would come. Now, all she had to do was ride the wave of justice, and the world would see her for who she truly was. What if you had to fight for every step you took? What if the world told you that you didn't belong, that you didn't deserve a chance? How would you rise? Amara's story isn't just about a girl with a guitar. It's about the power of self-belief and the strength that comes when you decide not to be silenced. If you've ever had to prove yourself, if you've ever had to show the world what you're capable of, join Amara's journey. Don't forget to share, and subscribe, because this story is just a beginning. Amara's life after that moment on the stage shifted. The fallout from her performance rippled through every corner of the entertainment world. The producers, the network, the people who had treated her like an object to be mocked. Now all they could do was watch as the world rallied behind her. Her story wasn't just one of musical talent. It was a story of resilience, of rebirth, of a young girl who had been silenced for too long and had found the strength to speak. James, now fully invested in the change he promised Amara, worked quickly to create an opportunity for her to take full control of her future. His guilt from not having known her sooner was driving him. But it was more than that. It was the sheer magnificence of her voice, her presence, and the way she had commanded the stage. He had witnessed many talented people, but none had the power to disrupt and reframe the world around them the way Amara did. You're not just here to take the spotlight, James had said, the words lingering in the air between them. You're here to create a new future for yourself, and for others who are too often overlooked. Amara looked at him with quiet intensity, her gaze cutting through him like a blade. The flicker of something deeper was there in her eyes, a vulnerability that she rarely allowed others to see. But she held it back, just barely, as though she had been taught long ago not to show too much, not to reveal too much. I've always known what I wanted, James. Her voice was soft, almost too soft. I just needed the right chance to show it. And yet, there was more to her than that. Something unspoken, something tangled in her heart. In those moments between them, when their eyes locked, when the quiet moments stretched on, there was an undeniable chemistry, an undercurrent of attraction that simmered just beneath the surface, unacknowledged, but there nonetheless. The nights after her performance were a whirlwind of interviews, phone calls, and opportunities flooding in from all sides. Fame unfolded. The show that had initially sought to use her for humiliation was now shifting its narrative, writing her into its own legacy. The world had seen Amara's strength or fire, and now the world was asking for more. James and Amara spoke often. Their conversations, at first about business, about the Dorothy Williams program, about music scholarships, and the opportunities now available to Amara, began to deepen, a connection that went beyond mentor and mentee, beyond employer and employee. They talked about their pasts. James spoke of the early days, of struggling to make it in the entertainment industry, of feeling like he had to bury parts of himself to survive. And Amara, slowly, hesitantly, spoke of her life on the streets, of losing her grandmother, of the harshness she'd witnessed, of how she'd learned to fight not just for survival, but for dignity. It wasn't long before those conversations took on a new energy, a different quality. Their chemistry, unspoken before, began to manifest, filling the spaces between their words. The pull between them was undeniable, each of them trying to resist it, but ultimately drawn together. One evening, after one of their late-night discussions about the future of the Dorothy Williams program, Amara was staying late at the studio to rehearse. The studio was empty, save for a few assistants packing up. She sat alone in the quiet, her guitar resting in her lap as she strummed the strings absently. James entered quietly, his footsteps soft against the floor. He had wanted to speak to her about a new opportunity, about her next performance, but there was something else he had been feeling, something he hadn't fully understood until now. "Amara," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "I know you're tired of hearing me talk about business and the future, but I think there's something else we need to acknowledge." Amara looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and the weight of unspoken words hung in the air. There was a vulnerability in James's eyes, an openness she hadn't expected. He wasn't just talking about their professional futures anymore. "You've always been underestimated, Amara." He stepped closer, his voice quieter now, more intimate. "I see it in the way you carry yourself, in the way you push forward. But you don't have to carry this weight alone." Her breath caught in her throat, a shiver running down her spine. There was something tender in his voice now, something that made her heart race in a way that was unfamiliar, unexpected. She set the guitar aside, slowly standing up. They were closer now, so close that she could feel the heat of his body. The room seemed to shrink, the distance between them vanishing as the energy between them grew palpable. "You don't have to do this alone either, James," she whispered, her voice a mere breath. "We both know what it's like to fight for what we deserve." And then, just as the space between them seemed to become too much, their lips met, soft at first, unsure, a question. It was the kind of kiss that asked for permission without words, a promise without a future. The kiss deepened, and in that moment, the weight of everything, the pain, the struggle, the resistance, seemed to vanish, replaced by something far more powerful. Desire. It wasn't just the chemistry they shared in their words anymore. It was something raw, something real, something that had been building between them since the moment they met. Have you ever felt like the world was out to break you? Have you ever been underestimated, ignored, treated like you didn't belong? But what if the most powerful thing about you is the ability to rise above? What if the only thing you needed to change everything was to trust yourself, to take that first step toward claiming your power? Amara's story is a lesson in resilience, in vulnerability, and in the fire that burns inside when you refuse to be silenced. Subscribe to follow her journey, because true power isn't something we are given. It's something we choose. The next morning, after the quiet storm of emotions and newfound intimacy between Amara and James, the world had changed for both of them. Amara's performance had gone viral, but the applause she had received was just the surface. Beneath that applause was something far deeper, a shift that had occurred, not just in her, but in the world that had once tried to silence her. James had watched her from the back of the room, his heart still heavy with the weight of their connection. What they had shared last night, that kiss, was more than just a fleeting moment. It was a revelation, a vulnerability that neither had expected but both craved. There was something about Amara that pulled him in, something that went beyond her talent, her history, her struggle. It was the way she saw the world, the way she carried herself like someone who had seen the darkest sides of life and still found a way to shine. But James couldn't ignore the professional side of things. Amara had just risen from nothing to become a symbol, a beacon of hope, strength, and raw talent. He had promised to help her, to offer her the opportunity she deserved, and now it was time to make good on that promise. However, his feelings for her were complicated. The kiss had unlocked something inside him, something he hadn't dared to acknowledge. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, but he couldn't let it cloud his judgment. What they shared was dangerous territory, not just for him, but for her. Was he just another person trying to take advantage of her? Or could something more come from their connection? He knew the answer. Deep down, it wasn't about her being a project or a charity. It was about the bond that had formed between them, the way they had both found solace in each other's vulnerabilities. But even so, the reality of their positions, of his wealth and status, of her past, made it complicated. As Amara left the studio that morning, her feet pounding against the pavement, she felt alive in a way she never had before. The night had been more than just physical. It had been a moment of connection, of unspoken understanding between her and James. But there was a nagging feeling at the back of her mind, one that she couldn't shake, the sense that this was just the beginning of something that would change everything. She had been so focused on proving herself, on being seen for who she truly was, that she hadn't stopped to ask the most important question. What do I want, now that I have everything I need? The power she felt after her performance wasn't just about the applause. It was about knowing that she could stand tall in a world that had tried to break her and still claim her place. She was more than just a girl with a guitar. She was a force. But the pull between her and James was undeniable. She had felt it last night, in the quiet of the studio, when their lips met and the world seemed to melt away. She had never felt such a rush of emotion, such an intense chemistry with anyone before. And despite her fears, despite the walls she had built around her heart, she knew that the connection between them was something she couldn't ignore. Yet, Amara was no fool. She had always known how to protect herself, how to keep herself safe from the world, and from people who only saw her as a way to make themselves feel good. But with James, it was different. She couldn't decide if she was drawn to him because of the comfort he offered, or because he saw her for who she really was. It didn't matter. What mattered was what came next. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Amara. Her performances took off, each one better than the last. The Dorothy Williams program was gaining momentum, thanks to the publicity Amara's vile performance had brought. James had been true to his word, setting up the first scholarship fund in Dorothy's name, ensuring that children who had been given no opportunities before now had a chance at greatness. Amara felt the weight of it all, the success, the recognition, the growing pressure. But through it all, James remained by her side. He didn't just want to manage her career. He wanted to see her rise, to see her claim her place in the world. His actions spoke louder than words. But despite their professional connection, the unspoken tension between them grew. They found themselves alone more and more, and each time the chemistry was undeniable. The air between them seemed to crackle with the possibility of something more. Their conversations often turned into lingering silences, the space between them charged with a kind of intimacy that neither could ignore. One night, after a gala event celebrating the success of the scholarship program, Amara found herself in James's office, her hand resting lightly on the desk, as she glanced at the city lights outside the window. The moonlight bathed her skin in silver, and the moment felt timeless, like something out of a dream. James walked in, his expression unreadable, but his eyes never left her as he approached. "Amara," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want you to know that I've always believed in you." She turned to face him, her heart racing at the intensity in his gaze. "I know. I felt it from the start." There was a pause, a silence that stretched between them, before he spoke again. "You're not just a performer. You're a force, a power. You've changed the world just by being yourself." Amara felt the weight of his words, and her chest tightened with emotion. She knew what he meant, but something deeper was stirring between them, something more than just admiration, desire. "James," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I've never wanted to be seen as anyone's charity case. I'm here because I've earned it, but I can't help how I feel about you." His breath hitched, his gaze softening. "Amara," before he could finish, she closed the distance between them, her hands reaching for him. The kiss was slow at first, tentative, a question. But as they drew closer, the world outside faded away, leaving only the two of them, their hearts racing as one. "Do you believe in love that's born from struggle, from overcoming the odds?" Amara's journey is a testament to the power of resilience and self-belief. It's not just about talent. It's about finding your strength, your voice, and your place in the world. If you've ever fought to be seen, to be heard, this story is for you. Subscribe now to follow Amara's journey, because love, power, and truth are just a step away. The weeks that follow were a whirlwind of opportunities, pressures, and unspoken tension that neither Amara nor James could ignore. Amara's rise to fame had been swift, but it wasn't just her raw talent that captivated the world. It was her story. The Dorothy Williams program flourished, thanks to Amara's influence. Her performances were broadcast across the globe, and each time she sang, she not only reclaimed her place in the world, but also gave voice to the voiceless. James, though proud of the work they had done, found himself struggling with the growing feelings he had for her. It wasn't just admiration. It was something deeper, something that had been ignited between them from the first moment their eyes met. There was an undeniable connection, one that had only deepened over time. But the weight of their positions, he as the powerful executive, she as the rising star, made it complicated. She was not just his protege anymore. She had become his equal, someone who made him question everything he thought he knew about ambition, love, and the price of success. Amara, on the other hand, had always known what she wanted. She had been driven by the hunger for recognition, for a world that would see her, hear her, and treat her as something more than the streets had. But James was different. He had given her more than just opportunities. He had shown her a kind of vulnerability she had never imagined. He was not just the man behind the program, the man who had paved the way for her career. He was the one who saw her, not just a performer, but the woman who had been scarred by life, by loss, and by the burden of being invisible. One evening, after one of her performances at a prestigious charity gala, Amara found herself in James's office once more. The city lights shimmered below, casting long shadows across the room. It had become a space where they both found themselves after long, exhausting days, caught between dreams and desires, between the public image they both projected and the private reality they shared. Amara stood by the window, her fingers tracing the cool surface of the glass. She felt him before he even spoke, his presence like a quiet storm in the room. She turned to face him, her heart racing at the sudden vulnerability that flooded through her. "Amara," James began, his voice soft, but laden with an emotion that was both familiar and frightening. "There's something I need to say." He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking with each passing second. The air was charged, electric, as if everything around them had faded. leaving only the two of them standing on the precipice of something they both feared and wanted. Amara's breath caught in her throat. "What's that?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but her eyes were locked on his, wide open, daring, vulnerable. James reached for her, his hand brushing against hers before gently cupping her cheek. "I've tried to fight this, Amara, but there's no denying it anymore. I feel something for you, something I can't ignore." His voice cracked slightly, the weight of his confession hanging between them. Amara's heart pounded, the wall she had carefully built around herself starting to crumble. She had been waiting for this moment, yet still it caught her off guard. She had fought so hard for everything she had, for her independence, her voice, but what she hadn't counted on was the intensity of the feelings that had blossomed between them. "I've felt it too," she whispered, her fingers reaching up to touch his face, her touch tender, almost hesitant. "But James, I can't." "You don't have to say anything, Amara." His voice was hoarse now, filled with a deep longing, the kind of longing that had built up between them in those stolen moments. "I know we've both got our baggage. We're not perfect, but I can't keep pretending that what's between us isn't real." And then, without another word, he pulled her close, his lips crashing against hers in a kiss that was slow, tentative, but full of promise. It wasn't the kiss of a business partner or a mentor. It was the kiss of someone who had seen her, truly seen her, for everything she was and everything she could be. As their kiss deepened, it was no longer about the world outside or the future they both faced. It was about the two of them in this moment, giving into the pull that had always been there. Amara felt the tension between them release, her body pressing into his, her hands tangling in his hair as the world around them faded away. She had longed for this, longed for someone to recognize her power, her desire, and in James, she had found someone who didn't just see her as a girl with guitar, but as a woman who could take control of her destiny. The kiss was heated, charged, and full of emotions that neither could hold back. It wasn't just about passion. It was about vulnerability, about letting go of the walls they had both built around themselves. It was about finally finding trust, the kind of trust that had been missing in their lives. When they finally pulled away, breathless and tangled, Amara's chest rose and fell with the weight of everything that had happened between them. She looked up at James, her eyes clouded with desire and confusion, but also with a sense of clarity. "What happens now?" she asked softly, her voice shaky but strong. James smiled, his thumb brushing against her cheek. Now we make sure no one ever forgets who you are." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as they rested on her waist, pulling her closer. "You're not just going to be a star, Amara. You're going to be the star, the one who changes everything. If you've ever struggled to be seen, if you've ever fought for the chance to claim your place in the world, Amara's journey is for you. It's not just about love. It's about self-discovery, empowerment, and the strength that comes when you finally decide to let go and trust. Love, after all, is just the beginning of the journey. Subscribe to follow Amara's story, because her future is just getting started, and yours could be too.